in this particular project, we are not using fancy physics-informed AI or hybrid models. So identify what type of model do I need. So usually what I recommend is, even if you need complex model, start simple, which starting simple means build linear models, input, output. So what's the final titer? What's the final manoxidilation pattern in my fermentation? And based on which inputs. If you have even temperature variations on time, just take, for example, the mean average of temperature. So input, output, build linear models.
Welcome back to our conversation with Ignasi Bofarull-Manzano, who is a senior data scientist and CMC consultant at Körber Pharma. In part 1, we started unpacking what digital twins really are and how to bring order to messy bioprocess data. Now we push further into the practical side. We look into validation, regulatory perspective, and what it takes to translate digital innovation into real CMC results. Let's continue the conversation. Are you juggling the complexities of CMC development while trying to enjoy the beauty of biotech? Have you ever wondered if there's a way to simplify bioprocessing? Welcome to the Smart Biotech Scientist podcast, where we're diving headfirst into the very challenges you face. We're breaking it down, demystifying the jargon, and giving you the keys to unlock your full potential. I'm your host, David Brohlman, and I get it. With 15 plus years in the biotech industry, I face the same challenges you do. There's a way to simplify and streamline so you can remove complexity, you can skip trials and errors, deliver without delay your groundbreaking therapy to clinics and market, and still enjoy every single step. Do you want to learn how industry experts and I did it? Grab a cup of coffee and your favorite notebook and pen. Now is the time to take your bioprocessing game to the next level. Let's smarten up biotech.
Using models in development is one thing, or in research and development. But then when you want to use the model in manufacturing, you have to tackle the regulatory aspects as well. How should we approach this side?
So here I would like actually to push a bit back, and it's a bit actually philosophical, if I can say so. Right now, as people are producing as we speak, it works like this. So usually you first do process characterization, process validation. So you generate data in the lab, then you fit a model, and then based on this mathematical model, you define, for example, a proven acceptable range or a design space. Based on the results of this model, you do the filing, and these are the ranges that you are allowed to operate in manufacturing. So actually, nowadays, already the manufacturing process has the influence of a mathematical model. The only difference is that this exercise is only done once, based on small scale data only, which actually could be even worse, because we know that ideally we scale up dimensionless, like based on dimensionless numbers, but we know that there are always some scale effects. So we don't really touch the control strategy that we define anymore. And then this is how we are used to produce it in GMP. And basically this concept of digital twins, especially the concept of end-to-end digital twins that we are implementing in manufacturing, basically, and put simply, it comes with some limitations I can mention later, but is this type of models that you use in individual unit operation silos during process validation to define parts for each individual unit operation. First of all, we concatenate them into end-to-end because we have shown many times that this is very important. And basically what we do is we deploy them in real time, which means getting this model is fed with real-time data, makes a prediction, and this prediction with a human in the loop first, it's fed back to the physical system. So it's actually the same type of mathematical model. So I know that when it comes to manufacturing GMP, there is a lot of respect, and I think it is good that there is this respect there. But actually, to me, the worst thing is, or what is worse is not doing anything, which means that we do some experiments in lab scale, we fit a mathematical model, we define some ranges or design spaces, and then even if we might see some shifts in manufacturing, like with the scale or whatever, we stick to this fill design space and we don't do anything. So for me, this is worse than actually using the same type of models, but simply deployed in real time to allow us to make risk-based decisions, while there is still always a subject matter expertise in the loop. So from the concept point of view, there is not such a big difference between lab or process development and manufacturing. Now, from the regulatory point of view, there are some, but because not for the model itself. So we need to do a creditability assessment of the model, but especially since the model is interacting with the manufacturing system, then all the interfaces need to be validated based on GAMP procedures. But this is only regarding the paperwork. I mean, also we need to keep track things like model update versioning, all these things. But other than this paperwork on a regulatory point of view, I would not see a huge difference between using models in the lab and using them in manufacturing. So basically, as I said, when it comes to the data connection interfaces, all this follows a different route, which is all these GAMP guidelines. When it comes to the mathematical models, basically it's essential to do a credibility assessment. So the standard is to follow the ASME VNP 40. So ASME stands for the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. And basically there you need to clearly specify what is the things like the question of interest, the context of use, assess then model risk, which is the decision consequence. So if in case the model is wrong, what would be the consequence, and also the model influence. So for example, is it that if the model tells me release a batch, I release it, or I first do testing, for example. So based on this, you define a model risk, and then based on that, you define a credibility plan, which basically consists in verification, validation, and applicability. So verification basically is that if you believe that you're doing 2 plus 2, what is really happening under the hood is 2 plus 2 and not 2 plus 3. So it's more like a numerical or mathematical or actually software aspect. And then validation to assess many things. So for example, leave some runs for testing, challenging runs, evaluate the accuracy based on the context of use, doing uncertainty quantification, etc. So with this, you do this credibility plan, and this is usually enough to get the model deployed in manufacturing.
Let's zoom out a bit. So we highlighted that the monetary ROI is great, or is even much greater in manufacturing. There's definitely huge benefit in development. You can speed up development. You can find better conditions. If we look now at the timing and also the efforts you want to invest in modeling efforts, when should you start? What should you do at the beginning? What can wait later? Can you give some advice to startup leaders here?
Yes, so I would say in terms of return of investment, if you start from development, I would say the return of investment starts already from day one, because applying models can help you in making the experiments that you anyway need to do in a more efficient way. So the return of investment is immediate. In manufacturing, I mean, this is a very use case based. So in manufacturing, of course, the efforts are higher, and this depends on how many equipment you have, how the legacy of your systems, so how many interfaces need to be built and validated. And the return of investment, it depends a lot on the case by case. However, for example, I'm allowed to mention one specific case. So actually, the 3rd of September, we have an event here in Vienna, which is called the PASEX Savvy Day, where we bring some customers to show use cases. So one of these customers that we'll be presenting is Takeda. And just to give some return of investment numbers. So Takeda approached to us with data of a biological production process that was running for quite some time. So they had considerably amount of data, manufacturing data. So the first thing we did, it was, we don't start building a digital twin straight. So as I said, first, we start always offline. So we train based on all this historical data. We train an end-to-end process model. And actually, what it was very interesting to see is that after training and running some simulations, so this multi-input, multi-output, and multi-unit operation optimization problem, what the model suggests is that by changing the set points of 6 process parameters from 4 different unit operations, the yield could be increased by 35%, while decreasing the out-of-specification rate also a lot. I mean, this out of specification rate was anyway so we decreased it by 65%, but it was already low, so it's a bit. But basically, the main point is that we could increase yield by 35% while keeping at least product quality within specifications, even if not improving that. However, this is actually not a digital twin because it was used fully offline, so this is an end-to-end process model. But what it was clear is that for this specific process, we already have a business value, which is we can now increase the yield by 35%. And it was clear because also what is very interesting for me is that these 6 new set points are not based on exotic new process parameter ranges. So basically, we never allow the model to extrapolate. So based on variations that anyway already happened in the last years, some brands perform better, some others. So the model identified that throughout all this data chaos, that these changes in 6 process parameters could lead to a 35% increase. So actually within the design space, you could increase yield by 35%. First thing, so it was a very clear business value benefit having an end-to-end process model. So then the next step was to deploy it as a digital twin. So then we already achieved the digital shadow stage. So now the model receives data from all equipment from the shop floor in real time. And right now we are in the end-to-end digital twin implementation. And there, what we are seeing is that based on, at least on the simulations, that we could, in addition to this 35% yield increase, we could still squeeze a 4% yield increase based on the expected or seen normal variability during manufacturing. This is for example, it's one of the most real use cases, and this is why we invite them to present in Vienna. By the way, you are more than welcome if you want to join us on 3rd September. But it's also true that every process is different. So, for example, if you only produce 2 batches per year, then you might not need a digital twin. So this is the reality. Still, I would recommend going for an end-to-end process model, so offline, because it can help you that, for example, to increase the yield, maybe not by 35%, but with another number. So you make sure you produce more out of the 2 batches that you perform every year. But since you only produce twice per year, having a digital twin, which comes with some interfaces efforts, might not pay off. But this is a case-by-case study.
These are impressive numbers, no doubt, and the business value is clear. Where should a smart biotech scientist start right now if they want to use modeling?
First, as I mentioned, is identify what the bottleneck. So there are many problems and many business needs, but what's the biggest, I would say, business need is, so try to identify your bottleneck. For example, my chromatograph, like I have a bottleneck in protein A, for example, or I have a lot of variability in upstream, which leads to huge manosylation patterns, for example. So try to identify what's really critical or most critical, because you might have many critical things. Then identify which type of model do you need. And also this is important because the use case that I mentioned, that it will be presented in Vienna 3rd September with Takeda, is based on linear mixed models. So in this particular project, we are not using fancy physics-informed AI or hybrid models. So identify what type of model do I need. So usually what I recommend is, even if you need complex model, start simple, which starting simple means build linear models. So input, output. So what's the final titer? What's the final manosylation pattern in my fermentation? And based on which inputs. If you have even temperature variations on time, just take, for example, the mean average of temperature. So input, output, build linear models. And before going for fancier models of one individual unit operation, what I always recommend is concatenate or build a linear model, even for less fancy unit operations such as virus inactivation. Concatenate them and then evaluate how each individual process parameter is really affecting not the outcome from that individual unit operation, but the final drug substance quality. So then you can identify what is actually critical and where, and then you can start putting more resources where needed. And then, for example, you can start building fancier models in some specific unit operations, for example. And also start offline for sure. Digital twin is, I know is everyone uses. I mean, also another thing is that many people talk about digital twins, but in context that they are not really digital twins. They are just digital models. So start fully offline, end-to-end process models. And only once you have proof the business benefit, for example, in this case, 35% increase yield, then scale it. And actually following these steps will be good to get, for example, C-level backup, because you can already show that these models bring value. Because otherwise, You might start with proof of concepts that end up nowhere or are very expensive. So yes, start small and then build on top of that.
This has been great. What additional questions should I have asked?
I think we covered most of the things, right? So we covered like types of models, also regulatory concerns, like application, like from early stage development to manufacturing. Everything I said until now, it was of course my personal opinion, but if I can give one more personal opinion, is that I'm seeing, as I said also before, that now with all this AI boom, with agentic AI, all this, people are delegating a lot to AI. So I also do a lot. So I use AI daily for many different things, and it's a really great tool. But when it comes, for example, to modeling, it's very important to understand what you're doing. And I know that this is not appealing for some people because they directly hate numbers. But I would say that at least getting some training on the more basic statistics so you can understand what the model is telling you, if there is enough level of confidence on the predictions, all these things. I think it's really valuable so that you don't have just an AI evaluating the model for you.
What is the most important takeaway from our conversation?
I would summarize it as first identify what's your business problem, then which type of model you need for this business problem to solve it. But even if you need a very fancy model to solve this business problem, don't start with a fancy model. So start simple, linear models. Always face the process end-to-end in a holistic way or integrated process model way. Define the data that is required to train this model. So start with only the required data. Show business value offline, for example, optimization, etc. And then evaluate if you really need to deploy and scale it, for example, a digital twin with a real-time implementation.
Excellent. There you have it, Smart Biotech Scientists. Thank you so much, Ignasi, for being on the show, for sharing your passion and explaining very well what digital twins are, what modeling is, and what are the benefits. Where can people get a hold of you?
I would say that on LinkedIn. They can send me an invitation request and we can connect on LinkedIn. I think it's the easiest way.
All right, Smart Biotech Scientists, reach out to Ignasi, talk about modeling and a lot more. And thank you once again, Ignasi, for being on the show today.
Thanks a lot, David.
What Ignasi makes clear is that digital twins aren't magic. They're built on trust, validation, and physics grounded in real process understanding. Whether you're just starting to untangle your data or already piloting hybrid models, the path forward is the same. Start small, validate rigorously, and let the science lead. Are you enjoying the show? Please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite platform because it will help other scientists like you find the show. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. All right, smart scientists. That's all for today on the Smart Biotech Scientist podcast. Thank you for tuning in and joining us on your journey to bioprocess mastery. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. By doing so, we can empower more scientists like you. For additional bioprocessing tips, visit us at smartbiotechscientist.com. Stay tuned for more inspiring biotech insights in our next episode. Until then, let's continue to smarten up biotech.